Welcome to Choice Conversations. I'm your host, Chris Stefanik. Today I have the pleasure of talking with Jay Earley. He is the author of Self-Therapy, the creator of the Self-Therapy Journey, and he's a psychologist who has been practicing for 40 years now. So, Jay, welcome to the show.
Thanks. I'm glad to be here.
Great. So, the topic of self-therapy, of course, there are many different strategies, different practices for doing psychology. This one revolves around the specific methods associated with interfamily systems therapy and parts work. Could you maybe give us a real brief introduction into what that means? What are interfamily systems and
Sure.
And the like?
So it's internal family systems therapy is a method of therapy that was created by Richard Schwartz, and it's been around for about 30 years. And it works with parts, as Chris said, which are, you can think of them as subpersonalities, like little people, almost like little people inside you that have their own feelings, their own thoughts, their own motivations, even their own memories. So it's a way of recognizing the aliveness and the different aspects of the psyche, so that rather than just thinking of the things that are going on in your mind as defenses or complexes or, some of the more mechanical things, these are actually like little entities inside us that we can actually get to know and talk to and develop relationships with, and that makes the therapy very powerful.
When exactly did you come upon IFS therapy? Because you say you've been practicing for 40 years. It's been around for about 30. When did you come upon it, and maybe kind of walk us through what your journey has been like?
Sure.
To accept this as your strategy going forward to help people.
I discovered it in about 2002. A colleague of mine recommended it to me, and I got Dick Schwartz's book and started reading it, and it just struck me as, wow, this is really powerful stuff. I mean, I should say that this is not the first form of therapy to work with subpersonalities. There have been many, starting way back with Jung, and then psychosynthesis, and voice dialogue, and ego state therapy, and then there's even some more recent ones. But to my mind, IFS is by far the most sophisticated of these forms of therapy that work with parts. Anyway, when I found out about it, I got very excited about it, and I got trained in it, and realized that it was so good. And as I started using it on myself first, and then with my clients, I discovered that it was really so powerful and helped them and efficient, and helped them to change in ways that just were much more powerful and efficient than before. And I basically do it with everybody now. Of course, what I do is still informed by the previous 30 years of my experience and training in other forms of therapy, but IFS is so good that it's really the main thing that I do. And in addition to that, I got very interested in it, and just more than just using it with my own clients. I got involved in helping to train other IFS therapists, and I developed courses which I taught to the general public to help people learn how to use IFS to work on themselves, and in doing peer counseling with other people in the course. It turns out that IFS is very good for self-therapy because, I guess I should say a little about IFS to explain that. Not only does IFS work with parts, but it understands that we all have what IFS calls the self, which is our kind of core self. You might think of it as our spiritual center. It's the place in us that is calm, connected, curious, compassionate. And so that in IFS, the agent of healing is not the therapist, it's the client's self. And therefore, of course, IFS has a lot of good techniques for helping people to get into self, to know whether they're in self or not, to help them get back into self when they get taken over by a part. Basically, you're either in self or you're taken over by one or more of your parts, which IFS calls blending. The parts are blending with you. So IFS has some very nice techniques for helping you to recognize whether you're in self or not and helping you to access self. And from there, you can then work with each of your parts, get to know them, develop a trusting relationship with your parts, and then the self is actually the agent of healing for the parts. And therefore, because IFS is set up that way, it actually makes it very amenable to being a form of self-therapy. And I recognized that early on and decided that I really wanted to help people be able to use it to work on themselves. And so I started teaching courses on that and teaching people how to use IFS to work on themselves. And then out of those courses, I ended up writing a book based on the main two courses, a book called Self-Therapy, which I self-published and has been amazingly successful. It has sold almost 20,000 copies and still going strong. And I still regularly get emails every week or two from somebody somewhere in the world telling me how much IFS has changed their life. So that's a little of the background.
Well, that's fantastic. Yeah, it's such a great feeling to be able to help people.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when I've talked to people about IFS, I've definitely encountered some skepticism and some people that maybe weren't openly skeptical with me, but kind of, raised an eyebrow. Some body language was going on that, right, yeah, I have these different personalities inside me and the like.
Uh-huh.
Well, I mean, one of the ways that I try to explain it that, with varying degrees of success I've had, but it's just, people all the time feel differently. At the same time, they can hold multiple thoughts, multiple opinions about the same topic. They're,
right.
Like example, people even use the language. Well, a part of me really wants to do that, but, at the same time, another part of me is pretty worried.
Exactly. Yeah.
And to try to explain to them that that's when you're doing that, that's sub-selves, that's parts, this is definitely your conscious mind is somewhat segmented with these, like, at least in my experience, it seems like a lot of them are internalizations of people around you. So you might internalize your parents or internalize siblings and things of that nature, or aspects of your parents, maybe a part of your parent, or multiple parts of your parents you've internalized as multiple parts of yourself then. So at any rate, this is a long-winded way of getting around to it, I guess. Do you encounter a lot of skepticism, and what do you say to people when you do encounter it?
Well, before I answer that question, let me just say that even though it's true, as you say, that some of our parts are internalized versions of aspects of our parents or other people, that's not the primary way that parts really come forward and take on roles because of usually the need to protect ourselves from pain. Or there are parts that are inner child parts that are actually parts that are in pain. So it's not always the internalization of other people. Even though that's part of what's going on, that's certainly not all of it by any means. So I just realized I got off. Ask me your question again.
Oh, sure. So my question was, how much skepticism do you encounter? And if you do encounter skepticism, how do you respond to that?
Let's see. I don't encounter that much, actually. Of course, it's a little different. I mean, most of the people, because I'm so well known in my book and all that, most of the people who come to me already know about IFS and know about parts, and that's why they come to me. So, of course, they're not skeptical. But I do sometimes get new clients who don't know anything, and I introduce it to them, and usually they're pretty open to it. So, no, I haven't run into much skepticism about it, for whatever reason.
All right. I guess one of the things that, and this is less of a, I guess this is another aspect of skepticism. Most of the time I get, that sounds really bizarre, or I'm really seeing the body language that they
Right.
think, they're looking at me like I have a third eye in the center of my forehead or something. But another kind of skepticism I've seen is one where, and this seems to be legitimate. They say, okay, I'm really thrilled, Chris, that you found this kind of therapy and it's helping you out a lot. And you said it's working better for you than anything else you've tried. But when I look at the studies that are out there, I see like nothing on IFS, and I see it looks to me like cognitive behavioral therapy or some of these other ones are a lot better proven to be successful. Why would I do IFS when there seems to be a fair amount? It's not the proven method.
Right. Oh, I have some opinions about that, I'll tell you.
Right. So I guess I have multiple parts here. This is one. What your thoughts are on that. It sounds like you're ready to answer this one. But the other is, I guess, are there people doing studies, or have you heard anything about any studies, or
Yes.
Are there some recent studies that I'm not aware of, so that you can maybe tell us about?
Well, first of all, let me tell you that the whole business about evidence-based, that's the official name for it, evidence-based forms of psychotherapy. That is, forms of therapy that have had lots of research studies done to prove that they're effective. The great fallacy here is that most forms of therapy, first of all, it takes a lot of money and a lot of effort to do research. It's not a simple thing to do. Most therapists are not anywhere near, including me, are not anywhere near equipped to do research. You have to be an academic, you have to know a lot about it, and generally you have to have funding. And the forms of research that have been, the forms of therapy that have been most researched are the ones that, mainly cognitive behavioral therapy, mostly because the people who are drawn to doing that are very intellectual types, so they tend to be, a much higher percentage of them tend to be researchers. And also it's a very simple form of therapy that lends itself to research. The other one that's had a lot of research is EMDR. But there's not only IFS, but there are many other forms of really good forms of therapy that have had very little research done on them, not because they're not good, but just because, they don't tend to be done by highly intellectual types who are researchers, and they haven't gotten a lot of funding yet. So it just makes me laugh when they say, "Oh, cognitive behavioral therapy is the one that's been proven to be." What's the only one that's been studied? So you can say it's proven to be the best, but it doesn't really prove anything. So now, in terms of IFS, the IFS community has recognized over the last 2 or 3 years that there's, well, first of all, there has been one major peer-reviewed study done on IFS. It was done by a researcher who specializes in rheumatology in people with rheumatoid arthritis. And so that's the study she did. She actually studied people with rheumatoid arthritis, and they were given IFS therapy, and they studied not only psychological changes, but actually changes in joint swelling and all kinds of other things. And it was very, very positive, and had much better results than studies done in using cognitive behavioral therapy and a couple other methods that over the years had been done on rheumatoid arthritis. So that's the one major study. But now the the IFS organization has set up a foundation whose job is to encourage and fund research in IFS. So they're working on it. It's going to take a few years and some money, but in a few years you'll see that we all know how good IFS is, and in a few years there will be a number of more research studies that prove that. But right now there's just one.
Right. Interesting. I'll have to look up that study and read it. Maybe put it in the show notes.
Okay.
So maybe you could walk the listeners through a little bit of how you do the actual therapy.
Sure.
What that kind of looks like.
So I guess in the other concept you need, in addition to the concept of the self, is the difference between protectors and exiles. And those are the two main types of problematic parts. Of course, there are also healthy parts. We all have healthy parts as well. And exiles are sort of wounded inner child parts. Some of you may remember the inner child work in the 80s that came out of John Bradshaw and some other people. You can look at IFS as a very advanced, sophisticated version of that, although it didn't just come out of that. By the way, I probably should explain the name Internal Family Systems Therapy. I think it's actually an unfortunate name, but let me just give you the background. Dick Schwartz, who created IFS, was originally a family therapist, and actually wrote one of the major textbooks on family therapy. And at some point, he realized that even when he did all the good family therapy stuff for people he was working with who had individual issues, like he did a whole study of working with bulimics, he found that it didn't always do the trick. And so he started to explore more what was going on inside people instead of just looking at their family dynamics. And he discovered parts. And he found out that not only do we all have parts, but they are related to each other in a system, just like people in a family are related to each other in a system. And in fact, some of the principles that he knew from systemic family therapy, he realized were playing out inside us in the relationships between our parts. And so that's why he called it internal family systems therapy. But of course it's very confusing because it makes it sound like it's a form of family therapy, and it's not. It's really a form of individual therapy. So anyway, that's where the name came from. So there are two main types of parts. Exiles, which are child parts that are in pain because of something, either trauma or some painful things that happened in childhood. And then there are the protectors, which are the parts that try to protect us from feeling the pain of our exiles, or protect the exiles from what they believe is how they're going to get hurt, somehow where they're going to get hurt or threatened in your life. And so when you start out to do an IFS session, you identify an issue you want to work on, and then you usually, that issue will usually show up in your life because of protectors. Because those are the parts that are they're closest to the surface of consciousness. The exiles are more buried. That's why they're called exiles. So, for example, let's suppose someone has an issue with procrastination. They tend to avoid doing tasks that need to be done. Well, that's because there's a part of them that actually doesn't want to do the tasks. The person may not be aware of that part. Usually people are aware of wanting to do the task, or at least realizing that they have to do the task. And they may not be conscious of the part of them that doesn't want to do the task, because this part may be afraid, well, if I do this task, maybe I'll fail. Or if I work on this project, maybe people will laugh at me. There can be all kinds of fears like that, which are usually based on stuff from childhood. where you were judged or laughed at or, ostracized or whatever it might be. And so our parts tend to carry over the fears from childhood. The exiles carry over the pain of what happened to us in childhood, and the protectors carry over the fear of those exiles being hurt again. And so you might have a protector that doesn't want to do the tasks that need to be done because it's afraid of what's going to happen. And so you start out in IFS identifying, a protector, or, there could be more than one that's involved in an issue. But to keep it simple, let's suppose there's one. So you would identify this part that procrastinates. And then, now the main principle in IFS is that in order to work successfully with a part, the client needs to be in self. And so IFS has ways of, like you basically, ways of checking, and basically, let me say a little more. The way it basically works is that the therapist acts as a sort of like a guide or a coach to the client to help them form a therapeutic relationship with their parts. So the therapist would guide the client to check to see if they're really blended with the procrastinating part, or check to see if they're actually open to getting to know it from that part's point of view. And of course, very often when we discover a part that's causing problems in our life, we want to get rid of it. Most of us are in the position most of the time where either we're taken over by a part or it's pushed aside.
Right.
And once we realize that we've got a part that's a problem, what is our first thing? What do we think? Let's get rid of it. Oh my God, I got a part that's causing me all these problems because it keeps me from getting work done. I get angry at the part. I want to get rid of it. I judge it. It's a stupid part. Well, that's totally understandable that we would feel that way toward our parts. But it doesn't help to change them. It's just, if you go ahead with trying to, first of all, you can't get rid of a part. And if you're angry at it or judgmental toward a part, it's not likely to talk to you, and you're not likely to learn much from it. So you want to get into self, which, with respect to that part, which means that you are open to getting to know the part, open to finding out what it's trying to do for you. Oh, okay. So the other thing I need to say is that every protector, no matter how destructive the effect of what it does is doing that because it's trying to help and protect us. So the part that's procrastinating and making things very difficult for somebody is doing that because it's afraid that if it lets them do the task, something worse is going to happen. Now, that's not true, probably, but the part doesn't know that. So the good thing is that these protectors, even though they're causing us pain and causing us problems, actually their hearts are in the right place. They are trying to help and protect us. And so therefore, you don't have to fight with your parts. You don't have to try to get rid of them. You can get to know them from an open place and find out what their positive intent is and connect with them around that. And then ultimately transform them. And I'll go into a little bit more how that happens. So basically, and the therapist's job is to help the client get into self. And then also help the client. And once the client's in self, the client can begin to develop a dialogue with the part. So what are you trying to accomplish by avoiding these tasks? Or what are you afraid would happen if you let me do this task? And the part will tell you. And you'll get a sense of, you'll get a sense of what the part is trying to do for you and what it's afraid of, and what fears drive it to procrastinate. And then you can make a connection with the part from self, and the part will begin to trust you. See, part of the reason these parts take on these dysfunctional roles in our psyches is because they're afraid of things, and they don't think there's any help, because they usually got formed, or at least they took on the burdens that they have, the roles that they have, when we were little children and we didn't have any help. And often these protectors, that was the best we could do at the time. But of course now we're adults and we have a lot more inner resources and outer support. And usually we're not in a painful, difficult situation anymore. Or if we are, we can handle it. And so these protectors aren't really needed, but they don't know that. So you get to know the protector and form a trusting relationship with it between the self of the client and the protector. And then get permission from the protector to work with the exile or exiles it's protecting. This is the other really important thing. Many forms of therapy try to bypass the protector. A protector is another word, is the IFS word for what are usually called defenses. Many forms of therapy try to get past the defenses, just bypass them, get to the exiles, get to the pain so we can heal it, which in one sense makes sense, but on the other hand, if you try to avoid the protectors, they'll just come in and sabotage your work with the exiles. And so in IFS, instead of avoiding them, you actually get to know the protectors and form a trusting relationship with them and ask their permission to work with the exiles. And if they won't give it, then you have a dialogue and you explain to them, find out what they're afraid of and explain to them that their fears won't happen, and usually then they'll give you permission. And so then, once you've got permission, you work with the exile and you ask the exile to show you or tell you what happened in childhood to cause it to be in pain or trauma. And then you go through a series of steps to actually heal that pain and trauma. And then once the exile has been healed and transformed and is no longer in pain and no longer feeling in danger, then the protector can relax. Doesn't need to do its job anymore because the exile is not threatening you with pain coming up and it's not in danger. And so that's the beauty of IFS, is that once you heal the exiles, the protectors can let go and then your behavior changes. So that you find the exile that was maybe shamed when you were a child, when maybe you had difficulty with your homework and your father who was supposed to help you with it instead shamed you, and so you now want to avoid doing homework. That's where the procrastination came from. So you go in and you find the exile that was shamed by your father, and you go through the steps and heal the exile. Then you make sure that the procrastinating part knows that the exile's been healed, and then usually it can relax. It doesn't have to procrastinate anymore. So that's the idea.
Nice, yeah. I think one role that a lot of people could relate to would be addiction. So you could have a part that's about addiction, and this is really, really common because when most people think of addiction, they think of just like drugs, but the addiction is way more common than people shooting up heroin and the like.
Right.
I mean, there's many socially acceptable forms of addiction that I guess as far as a percentage of the population goes are harming many more people than the ones that are not socially acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
There's things like addictions to food. The obesity rates are just crazy, or addiction to work or sex,
exactly,
or stress, or even just Facebook and Twitter and these people that can't go more than a minute without checking their phone.
Right, or gambling or shopping. Yeah, there's a whole lot of it. Yeah.
Right. So it takes many forms, and what happens is you have the protector, is this addictable, and it's like, oh, you might, if I don't keep, if you start to, especially if there's something that's about to trigger, an exile, you don't need to think about that. Why don't you just go have that piece of cheesecake?
Exactly.
And it's thinking, I need to distract you because you can't handle dealing with that exile.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that it's just sadly just really, really rampant. But an example, there's of course many other exiles and protectors that are common, but that's one I see all the time.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things about addictions is that there's almost always two protectors involved whenever there's an addiction. There's the part that's involved there's the addict part, And then there's usually another part that we call the inner controller, which tries to control the addiction. And it's usually rigid, and like if it's a food addiction, it tries to put you on a rigid diet, or it shames you whenever you go on a binge, or the same if you have trouble with alcohol. There'll be a part that tries to control you drinking, and then really attacks you and shames you whenever you drink too much. And so a big part of the dynamics in addiction is not just the part that is overly needing, the fix. There's also the part that fights against the part that needs the fix. And even though you might think, if we could just make the inner controller parts be successful, then the addiction would stop. Well, the problem is that sets up an inner conflict between these, which in IFS, there's a technical term for it in IFS, it's called a polarization. So that there's this constant fight going on between the addict part and the inner controller part. And in order to actually resolve the addiction, you not only need to work with the addict part and the exile that it's protecting, but you also usually have to work with the inner controller part and the exiles that it's protecting, and also maybe work with the actual polarization between the two parts. Because if you only work with the one and the inner controller takes over, first of all, the inner controller is a form of inner critic, which can be really harmful because it shames you and attacks you. But often, the addict part may actually get stronger because it rebels against the inner controller. Don't you tell me what to do, that kind of thing. And so, in order to really resolve the addiction, you not only have to work through all the issues around the addiction itself, but also that inner conflict between those two parts.
Yeah, that reminds me when you talk about the critic rebelling against the controller, again, just how much these really mimic people that you see in the real world around you, and how much it seems like there's a lot of internalizations, So like I've actually asked my parts, when I saw something that looked really familiar to me from someone that was very influential in my past, I'd be like, are you an internalization of this person or that? And very often I've gotten, yes, I am.
Yeah.
So that it's been something pretty interesting. And an example I could give of the inner critic, one of the ways that I've gotten the attention of some parts that were using strategies that were not very effective is to point out, to try to get to the root of what it is they were trying to do. So, which is a good problem-solving technique for any problem you have in your life, let alone, parts work. But so an example that was my inner critic. I said to the inner critic, I said, what is it that you're really trying to do here? Mm-hmm. And he said, keep you from messing up.
Right.
And I said, okay, so why is that important? And he's like, well, I want you to be successful. And I said, well, you know what? I want to be successful too. So I think there's a common area we can work together here. Now, and here I said, now given that you want me to be successful and you want me to not mess up, do you think criticizing me is an effective way of making that happen? And he instantly replied back, no. And I said, okay, so now we can sit down and we can start brainstorming on maybe some ways that you could be effective. It was a good way. I think if you can find what the purpose is and keep drilling down till you get to a real root purpose, something really, really at the base,
right?
Like peace or love or connection or just some of these real basic needs that everyone has. If you can get down to what that need is from the part, and then ask them, do you think what you're doing, the thoughts you're giving me, the actions I'm taking whenever you blend with me, do you think that's an effective way to meet that need? And, they will, very quickly respond back, no, it's not, and they're like, oh, well, okay, let's work on it. Okay, I'm not, and I find that really opens the door where maybe there was some resistance initially. That opens the door to then, okay, I'm willing to sit down at the table now and let's look at what our options are and see if we can't find a better way. So, to kind of close the circle with my inner critic, he said one thing that could help would be to make sure that I'm working on things, that each action I take in a day is working on something that's a high priority. So I gave him the task. I said, why don't you try to work on keeping me on priority? So you don't have to be critical, but just, if I'm straying off of what the priorities are for the day, kind of point back, say, hey, remember, there's 3 things we really need to accomplish today, and this isn't one of them. Could we get back to those pretty shortly? That kind of thing.
Great.
And I've noticed that since then, I feel like I've accomplished so much, that I'm at any point in the day, I feel like I'm always working on what I should be working on. And for me, I prioritize like everything in my life. This isn't just like a work related thing. So for me, a big priority is leisure and stress relief and spending time with my family and things like that. So, reading books and, in addition to chores around the house and making sure I'm successful in my career and things like that. So, but it's like every day I feel like I accomplish so much, and I have, in addition to that, just such a greater feeling of inner peace and harmony now that I don't have a voice in my head criticizing me, and instead doing something productive. So, it's an example. Of course, I've had other successes with other parts like this one, and reading books on IFS and reading about success stories online. Like, of course, there's a lot of other similar stories like this, but I thought it would be something of value to share that with the listeners, to show the successes I've had, kind of what it can look like.
Thanks. And by the way, I should say that not all protectors are as easily able to see that their role is not working as yours are. Yours seem to be pretty cooperative. Sometimes if you say to a protector, it doesn't always work is what I'm saying. I'm glad it worked for you, and it does work sometimes, and that's a great approach. But sometimes the protectors will say, well, I think it is working, or they'll say, well, it's the best, it's the best we can do, or, so often, the approach that you're using is sort of the first try. See if you can negotiate with the protector and get it to see that its role is not helping, or that it's even causing problems, which is often the case. And sometimes that will really work, and other times it's not enough. You actually have to heal the exiles first before the protector will be able to let go. Sure.
Yeah, and I know there's different strategies for healing protectors and the like as well. Or I'm sorry, healing the exiles and the like.
Right.
Yeah, it's sometimes I've had some instances where working with parts, it was like magic, and it's you sit down, you have a conversation with this part of you, and the problem's fixed, and you're good to go. Other times, it takes several conversations. You hit roadblocks, and you have to just keep coming back and working on it, and it's a journey, and the goal is to get progressively better. The goal is not to be self-actualized and completely enlightened and totally healed, because if that's the case, you're probably never going to reach that goal. It's a lifelong journey.
Right, exactly.
So that's, and as long as you're consistently moving forward, and you might have some days where you regress, but I like to liken it to following the stock market. If your investments, no investment just goes straight up. Any stock chart you bring up, it goes up and down, on one day to the next could go up and down. But what you want is, in the long term, is there a steady trend upwards in your investment. So as long as, the trend is that you're progressively making improvements in your life. You're progressively getting more cooperation from your parts and implementing healthier strategies and having more inner harmony and peace. That's what you want. Yeah. So, I don't mean to give the impression that this is magic and you can fix your problems with like that. Just sit down, one discussion, work through, do a little digging, do some brainstorming, and bing bam boom, problem solved. Sometimes it is that way. But often it's not. Yeah.
The nice thing I just want to say is that even though there are all those different ways that things can get stuck or blocked or not working, the nice thing is that IFS always there's always what to do next. In other words, no matter what's happening with a client, and no matter how they're stuck or how this part is not reacting very well, what it is, I always know what to do next. There's always a next step to move the process ahead.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah, it's really effective at just cutting to the chase, and it's very efficient at solving problems, internal problems.
Yeah.
So one thing I wanted to pick your brain about is a method of psychotherapy that you see often in some books, and it seems like a lot of people don't have a tremendous amount of success with it, and that's dream analysis. But one thing I've found with dreams is when I use parts work for dream analysis, it's extremely effective. So I will, I'm in the habit now of when I have a dream, I'll wake up and I will ask my parts. I'm like, oh, who sent me that? Mm-hmm. And often that part will come forward and I'll say, oh, well, what was the message you were sending me? And they will just tell me right out. And like you hear people, doing role plays of dream analysis or talking about dreams they had and doing, real, not even a role play, just the actual dream analysis. And and there's all this guesswork and, I think this meant that, and it really, with parts work, you can cut right through that and get, directly what was the message that was there. I found it to be a really, really powerful way to do dream analysis. And so I'll find that, sometimes if a part is feeling neglected, like I haven't talked to it in a while, it'll send me a dream. And so I've, that's been one way, one of the messages. If they felt worried about perhaps a strategy I was using in my life or where the direction a relationship was going or whatever, all of these things that people are trying to figure out in, I guess, more standard dream analysis or, following Freudian methods or whatever. But I don't know, I guess, have you incorporated parts work with dream analysis at all, or have you seen any success with that?
I haven't done it much. But I know what you're saying. I know that technique. That's the one that Dick Schwartz teaches. And it is very effective. So thank you for sharing. That's a great example of how the parts work really can be very powerful. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's so efficient. I like to listen to some podcasts and people that talk about psychology a lot, and I'll hear people doing dream analysis. Like somebody will call into a podcast and there'll be dream analysis, and it's so primitive, compared to when I get in there and do dream analysis. It's right on, and the guesswork's taken right out of it, and it's really efficient and powerful. So, but this brings into another topic I wanted to discuss with you.
Okay.
So typically people say dreams are your subconscious's way of communicating with you, and that's the dream analysis proponents are like, you really want to pay attention to dreams, do dream journals, try to analyze them, try to figure out what this message is, etc. Which brings to mind, it's like, okay, our subselves are parts in the subconscious. And originally I was thinking of that, like the true self was the conscious and the parts were the subconscious. But the more I've done parts work and the more things I've read and the more I've looked about it and the more I've talked to my own parts about it, the more I'm realizing that I think they really more sit in the conscious, or at least they straddle the fence, because you don't think of it, like you said, a part can blend with you and kind of take over. They grab the wheel. And so then the thoughts you're having, the actions you're taking, the thoughts at the front of your conscious mind are there from this part.
Exactly.
They're at the wheel. So they definitely reside in the conscious, at least partially, or at least, but the more I've looked around, I'm starting to feel like there are some parts that are a little more in the subconscious than others. Mm-hmm. And there's some that are like fully in the conscious, and then there are others that are more straddling the fence. And I don't know if that's even an important distinction, to be honest. So I guess
it's a good question.
What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it varies. Definitely some parts are conscious, and most exiles are unconscious, but not all. And with protectors, it varies. Some of them are conscious, and some some protectors are unconscious. Like, for example, with the example I gave with procrastination, for many people, the part that procrastinates is unconscious. They're not aware that there's a part that doesn't want to do the task. But that's not always true. Sometimes somebody will say, "Oh yeah, I can feel that urge in me to avoid this task," So that means that part is conscious for them. So it varies from person, but definitely there are many parts that are at least initially unconscious, in the unconscious, and one way to talk about the power of parts work is that it's a really effective way of accessing the unconscious. That's not all it is by any means, but by recognizing that these things in the unconscious are actually parts that you can talk to, and accessing them and having conversations with them, there you go. That's how you access your unconscious.
There's just extreme amount of power in it. Like you said, you have you feel you have some apprehension about something, or you're feeling some anxiety while you're having a discussion with your boss or with a spouse or something. You can, after the fact, go back and troubleshoot that. You can say, who was sending me that? Why did I have those butterflies? Why did I feel anxiety there? Mm-hmm. And then have a conversation and figure out really what it was, and that what you can learn about yourself is just amazing doing that kind of thing. And when the better you get, the more you do it, and the better you get at it, the more you don't need to go find a quiet room, sit down, get in like a meditative kind of frame of mind and access these parts. At least for me, I'm at the point now where I can, while I'm talking to someone, I can be sitting there and in my mind having a conversation with my parts, be like, oh, you're agitated right now. What's going on? Oh, yeah? Oh, okay. And it's really, or I can,
right.
I'll even be, I'll sit there and I'll be like, oh, I wonder what this part thinks about this. And it'll just tell me, or like, oh, I think this, and I can really do like on the fly parts work,
great.
Because the brain is definitely powerful enough for you to do this sort of thing, mm-hmm. Have multiple thoughts going on at once. So it's a really, really, really interesting. The benefits I've had from it have just been tremendous.
Yeah, and I congratulate you. You've really learned how to use it well. It's very impressive what you've done.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you. That means a lot. I've found that you can combine parts work with other practices, other psychological practices, mm-hmm. and get a lot of bang for your buck. So, like, I've already mentioned the dream analysis. I don't know if you're familiar with Nathaniel Branden's work.
Vaguely, yeah.
He has this technique. He calls them sentence completion exercises, or sentence stem completion. So you'll have a stem like, mother was always, and then he just says, just complete the sentence. Do it like, mm-hmm. Keep a journal, or you can record it or whatever, and you give like 10 completions to that sentence, or go to you don't have any left, and then father was often, or when I am sad, and you just complete that, or when I am happy, and just complete it, and the things that come up with sentence stems, that's a really, really powerful and a pretty effective, relatively effective way of finding out self-knowledge about yourself. You can go with the sentence stems that are out there that Brandon has, or you can create your own. Maybe you're troubleshooting an issue. When I was arguing with my wife, or just on the spot, you're like, I'm going to come up with my own sentence stems here to try to troubleshoot this issue, and then just roll with it. But what I found much better than sentence stems is I can give my parts sentence stems. So I'll ask the part, okay, complete the sentence stem. And because sometimes they're not, and it's really like, really just so efficient, because there'll be times when, I'll bring a part forward. I'll be like, so what's wrong? Oh, I don't know. And then I just start giving them stems, and really quickly you get to the bottom of the issue. It's really, it's a way to make it even more efficient. I mean, parts work as it is a very efficient way, but to include something like sentence stems it can really, boost it. It's amazing what you can do.
That's interesting because, that's a little bit like what I do in Self-Therapy Journey. In Self-Therapy Journey is this web application that I've developed that's based on IFS. And one of the things that it involves is checklists and fill in the blanks that are almost similar to your sentence stems. And I haven't thought of actually doing that with parts. Because Self-Therapy Journey isn't just parts-oriented. Part of it is people can explore themselves in other ways, too. And like I have ways that people that can go in and get a sense of what happened in childhood that's behind an issue. So it's something similar to your sentence stems. But thank you. That's a nice idea. That kind of takes what I've done in Self-Therapy Journey and takes it even further. Interesting.
Yeah. I would give it a shot sometime. You can real quickly just do a Google search for Nathaniel Branden and sentence stems, and you can find a lot of it's available for free online. And unfortunately, he passed away just a couple months ago. But he's a therapist who his books are wonderful. But you had mentioned Self-Therapy Journey, and speaking of wonderful books. Before I let you go, I wanted to give you a chance to kind of tell the listeners how they can find out about your work, the Self-Therapy Journey, where's the best places to go to get it, where's the best places to go to get your book, and if they want to contact you, and any of that sort of thing. What? Okay, great. So, my main book on IFS is Self-Therapy, and that's available on my website, which is Personal Growth Programs, with hyphens in between the words, personal-growth-programs.com. And actually, that's just one of many books that I've written on IFS. Another really important one is Freedom from Your Inner Critic, which shows how to use IFS to transform inner critic processes, which is one of the biggest issues that people have. But I've also written quite a few other books showing how IFS can be used to resolve various issues. And then also, I've developed this web application, Self-Therapy Journey, which is based on both IFS and the pattern system, which is a personality system that I developed. So by combining the two, I was able to create this very powerful web application where you can basically go online and do your own inner work, both working on issues that you'd like to resolve, like procrastination or people-pleasing or inner critic stuff, or you can also use it to develop positive, what I call healthy capacities, like self-esteem or social confidence or work confidence or so on. Self-Therapy Journey not only takes you through with checklists and journaling and stories and quizzes, but it also has recorded guided meditations, which actually take people through segments of IFS sessions. So it's, and that's, if you want to try it out, you can just go to selftherapyjourney.com and check it out. And I should also say that I do a lot of work together with my wife, Bonnie Weiss, who's also an experienced, very good IFS therapist. And we've created together a whole set of audio products, recorded guided meditations, recorded courses, demonstration IFS sessions. We have all kinds of, and now I'm going to be shortly we also have webinars available that'll be available shortly. We have a whole online store with all that stuff, so feel free to check it out. And I also teach phone courses. Like right now I have a phone course, an inner critic phone course that starts next Tuesday, a 6-week telephone course. And I also regularly do telephone courses on the basic IFS, teaching people how to use IFS. Fantastic. I will be sure to link all of that in the show notes so that it's easy for the listeners to find it. And I'm also going to check out some of that myself. I wasn't aware of the audio courses and the like that you have. I would definitely be interested in that. So thank you for that.
Great, and it's really been fun talking to you, Chris.
Oh yeah, it's been my pleasure. So All right, well, take care and best of luck.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate doing this.